Hey everybody, John Delarose here, the leading Hispanic voice in science fiction, coming at you today with another review. I've been slow on these because I've been reading these giant omnibuses and not the epic collections, which are like 300-400 pages. So these are like, 600 to 800 pages. This one was almost 700 pages. It's Marvel Masters of Suspense, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko Volume 1. And this is packed with story. I was so excited to get this. And you see Steve Ditko's beautiful art on the cover. And more in here. You look at the table of contents and you just see how much you're really getting here. And this is what's cool. This table of contents is like a dozen pages by itself, because these are all short stories in these magazines that date back to 1956. They go all the way through, what is it, 1961. So you have 5 years of short stories here. They start out as 4-page stories, and then they go to 5-page stories, one of which is usually just like a splash page slash cover, which kind of tells you what the story is going to be about. Got a nice intro by Roger Stern, who's one of the better writers Marvel Comics has had, and it goes in here. So early on, what's interesting is some of these actually are not written by Stan Lee, but you get Carl Wessler on some of these, and they try to credit the letterers in here. Now, it was my understanding that they actually went to a lot of work restoring these images and restoring these covers, these colors, so that you could get a very nice representation of what this would have looked like if you just would have opened up a fresh comic book back in 1956, for instance. So the early ones have some different writers on it, and then Stan Lee comes in. I never see Stan Lee actually credited anywhere in here. I guess towards the end, a couple of them actually have a little signature of him. And you get short stories, The Night Visitor, and it's an alien, March has 32 days, because somebody had like a Groundhog Day type of event where he wished another day happened. You get a Greatest Experiment, and they go on. And there's just tons of stories like this, and it's really hard to review beyond just kind of showing you a few pages here of Steve Ditko's art. Just look at the dynamic attitude that he's got here. It's just so good in all of his art. It tells a great story, is what it does. And yeah, not much I can say really, because the stories really vary in quality. Some of them are great, some of them are, kind of silly. And then they're all over the map. There's monster stories, there's time travel stories, there's westerns in here. It's really just a smattering of like everything he did during this era. I actually was pretty happy to find the western ones, the Abominable Snowman. Those are fun. And I would have liked more western stuff if it would have been possible, because I don't get to read that very often. But a lot of these are very much like Twilight Zone, and then he did some covers for different magazines also, which are in between the stories, and they put them in date that they were actually made, so you can kind of get that progression of how he started with his art and then got better with his art, and how the stories got better over time too. There's lots of concepts in here that got reused by Marvel later on. There's one where there's like an invisible shrinking ray where somebody gets shrunk and gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and then ends up in a micro universe because of that. Well, they recycled that with Doctor Doom in Fantastic Four a little bit later. There is what was another common one they like to use? Obviously, Invaders from Planet X ended up in those early Marvel superhero books also. The Secret of Planet X, yeah, that sort of stuff. And different aliens of different sizes and shapes and all that. They end up being reused a little bit in some of the later stuff. And there's actually even towards the end here, if we can find it. This one is a pretty neat one. And you've got two look like kaiju things fighting on Mars. And the twist is there's dudes inside, and these are their space suits, and they're both trying to be the first to conquer Mars, and so they fight over it. And they both end up leaving because they both have problems. Or, I'm sorry, one ends up leaving. Well, the twist is one's from America and one's from the Soviets. and they both thought they were the first ones in space meeting aliens, but they were really just meeting each other. Very, very cute. Yeah, there's one where a wax museum that's pretty standard, like Twilight Zone, horror comics, things that you'd get in all sorts of different tropes. But very fun. I very much enjoyed this book. The One-Way Journey was a good one. I love this art right here. This is just cool. Rocky's Last Ride was kind of silly. Some of them are silly. There was one, here it is, that it happened on the silent screen. So this is very interesting. And you see now playing the Hulk. And so this is their Hulk character, which must have been an early development of the Hulk. And this was a pretty twisty thing, and where the story's like, he's stepping out of the TV into the movie theater, and then he's really stepping out of the TV into the movie theater again and again and again and again. Is he really stepping out to you? Do you know that you're not on TV or in a movie theater or whatever? It was that kind of a story. Pretty fun. Didn't go into the stuff like the Hulk goes into later, but they used that name and obviously used a hulking Goliath to be the Hulk. This was a fun one, the Stone Man. I enjoyed that. Teddy bear. Look at that creepy teddy bear. That is creepy right there. That's good art. The story actually is not all that creepy. The teddy bear ends up a protector. Pretty fun stuff. And yeah, I think it did get a little bit better towards the end. They used a couple of the same tropes over and over and over again. The monsters show up and they have to be stopped with this hidden door or something like that. They use the was I really just dreaming, or was this or am I crazy? That trope gets done a lot. And then they use the criminal does something bad, and then some ghost or something haunts him, and then he runs to jail and goes, "Please lock me up. I will never do anything bad again. I swear." They use that trope probably 3 or 4 times over the course of these stories. So they recycle some concepts. There's lots of alien invasions that are very similar. But you see some Journey into Mystery cover right here. But overall, the stories are fun and compelling, and because they're just 4 or 5 stories, if there's one you've seen before, you can just kind of skim through it pretty quick, get to the next one. And there's a lot of good stories in here also. A lot of fodder. It makes me want to write short comics and put them up on Patreon or something like that, but I don't know that there's that much demand for that for real. But I'd love to do this sort of thing, just get some high concepts out of the way that I don't want to write long stories about. Maybe someday when we have a pretty big Patreon following, we'll do something like this. But as you see, his art just gets better as it goes along. The colors are just very vibrant. I love these little color palettes that they had in the early 60s. Stan Lee, here we go. So here they start signing them, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko later on. And this is one of the Western stories they did together. That was very fun. I would love to do a Western too, as a matter of fact. And it actually ends early 61. It gets into Amazing Adult Fantasy, which is the precursor to Spider-Man when it ends up in issue number 15. I think the last issue in here is issue number 6 or 7. So we'll get a second volume of these stories, which will be great, and probably get into that Spider-Man era when everything changed. But yeah, highly recommend this. You can read these, like I said, just because they're 3-4 page stories. You get a second, you can read it. You can read it in between things. It makes a nice read for reading in between things, and just enjoying. I got some original art pages back in here as some extras, so you see what it looks like without the colors. Kind of neat. Very heavy inking on this one. And yeah, this is one of the cooler monsters that he designed right here. Very, very neat concept right there. And good stuff. And here's some, so basically I guess these were reprinted in the 90s, and he did some covers for those in the early 90s as they reprinted all these monster stories for a few issues and some pinups. And those are the extras. Pretty cool stuff. So very enjoyable book. This is a high recommend by me. If you enjoy good comic storytelling, this is definitely for you. Definite science fiction stories, horror stories, they're all over the map, so there's going to be a little something for everybody. All right, signing off. If you like this stuff, subscribe to my Patreon, patreon.com/JohnDelarose. It supports me doing all these videos, doing all this content. gets my streaming going, pays for my blog hosting, pays for art, for comics. I mean, it does everything. I do a little of everything. So much like this, I do a little of everything, something for everybody. So I hope you will check that out and get some cool short stories by me in the meantime. And I hope you enjoy Marvel Masters of Suspense Volume 1. See ya.